Two young twins, shaken and furious, confront their father with a chilling accusation. The police did it again. Their words shatter his world. A father torn between duty and his family is forced to make an impossible choice, as he uncovers a web of lies and corruption that goes deeper than anyone imagined. One decision changes everything. Who will he protect, his badge or his children? And what shocking revelation will finally bring him to his knees? This is a story of justice, betrayal, and the courage it takes to stand up for what's right. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. Marcus stood at the back of the cramped police department conference room, watching the chaos unfold. Officers shouted over each other, their faces red with anger. The news of Officer Noah Ryder's resignation had hit like a bomb, and the shrapnel was flying everywhere. He was just doing his job. Officer Thompson slammed his fist on the table. We're all at risk now. One mistake and they'll throw us to the wolves. Mistake? Lieutenant Chen stood up, her voice sharp. What happened wasn't a mistake. It was a pattern, and we all knew it. She looked around the room, making eye contact with several officers who quickly looked away. Marcus felt the weight of every word. As one of the few black officers in the department, he'd spent years walking a tightrope between his identity and his badge. Now, watching his colleagues divide into camps, he knew that tightrope was about to get even thinner. Captain Rivera tried to restore order. Everyone, please, this isn't helping anyone. But his words were drowned out by another wave of arguments. The whole system needs an overhaul, Officer Martinez called out. Noah's actions are just symptoms of a bigger problem. Oh, here we go with the systemic racism talk again, someone muttered loudly enough for everyone to hear. The door opened and 3 city council members walked in. The room fell silent. Councilwoman Harris, a tall woman with silver-streaked hair, took control immediately. What's happening in this department is exactly why we need change, she said firmly. The council is proposing a task force to investigate systemic issues in our law enforcement. We need transparency, accountability, and reform. Marcus stepped forward, his heart pounding but his voice steady. I'd like to be part of that task force. All eyes turned to him. We can't keep pretending these problems don't exist. Our community deserves better. Black's gone soft, someone whispered. Marcus recognized the voice. Officer Kelly, one of Noah's closest friends. Councilwoman Harris nodded at Marcus. We'll need voices like yours. The task force will include community leaders, legal experts, and officers committed to change. In the corner, Marcus noticed a group of senior officers huddled together, speaking in low voices and shooting dark looks his way. He'd seen that look before, the one that said he was crossing a line, betraying the Brotherhood. Officer Emily Ryder, Noah's wife, surprised everyone by speaking up from her seat near the window. I support this task force, she said quietly. Her eyes were red but determined. What my husband did, it can't happen again. The room erupted once more. Marcus watched as Zoe, a civilian administrator, slipped Emily a supportive note. The two women had formed an unlikely alliance in the wake of recent events. This is a witch hunt, Officer Thompson shouted again. They won't stop until they've destroyed everything we stand for. What exactly do we stand for? Marcus asked, his voice cutting through the noise. Because I thought it was about protecting and serving everyone equally. Captain Rivera finally managed to restore some order. The task force will proceed, he announced. First meeting is tomorrow morning. Those interested in participating can sign up with my office. As the room slowly emptied, Marcus caught snippets of conversations that made his stomach turn. We need to stick together, one officer whispered. Can't let them tear us apart from the inside. Marcus watched them go, noting who clustered together, who avoided eye contact, who seemed ready for change, and who seemed ready for war. The battle lines were being drawn, and he knew exactly where he stood. Councilwoman Harris approached him. Tomorrow at 9, she said. We'll need your strength, Officer Black. Marcus nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. The real work was just beginning. Marcus sat at his desk, the blue light of his computer screen illuminating his tired face. The clock on the wall showed 9:47 p.m., well past when he usually stayed at work. His finger hovered over the mouse as he read the anonymous email for the fourth time. You want proof of how deep this goes? Check incident reports from May 2019 to December 2020. Focus on Officer Matthews and his special task force. The truth is in what's missing, not what's there. His heart raced. The message had arrived from an encrypted email address, but something about its tone felt genuine. He picked up his phone and dialed Zoe. I need you to see something, he said quietly. Can you come to my office? 20 minutes later, Zoe leaned over his shoulder, her brow furrowed as she read the message. Matthews? Isn't he the one who got promoted right after the Harrison case was dismissed? Yeah, that's him. Marcus pulled up the department's digital archives. Let's start digging. They spent hours combing through incident reports. At first glance, everything seemed normal. Routine arrests, standard procedures. But as they cross-referenced dates and names, patterns emerged. Look at this, Zoe pointed to her notepad where she'd been tracking discrepancies. Every time Matthews's task force made an arrest, the body cam footage is listed as corrupted or unavailable. Marcus rubbed his temples. And the witnesses? Notice how many of them suddenly changed their statements? Their investigation led them to a dusty records room in the basement. Behind stacks of old files, they discovered a box marked Internal Affairs Restricted. Inside were dozens of civilian complaints that had never made it to official review. These were buried, Marcus whispered, his hands trembling as he held up a thick folder. All of these people tried to speak up, and nobody listened. The next day, Marcus met with a former officer named Rodriguez in a quiet coffee shop across town. Rodriguez's hands shook as he stirred his untouched coffee. They called it the Brotherhood, Rodriguez explained in hushed tones. Matthews was just their enforcer. The real power goes higher. Captains, lieutenants. They protect their own, make problems disappear. Back at the office, Zoe spread their findings across Marcus's desk. Complaint forms, surveillance screenshots, witness statements that never made it to court. She'd created a complex web of connections on a large corkboard, red strings linking names to incidents. Noah wasn't acting alone, she said, stepping back to take in the full picture. He was part of a system. Look at these dates. Every time an officer faced serious accusations, Matthews's task force would manufacture a crisis across town. Perfect distraction. Marcus stared at the evidence before them, his throat tight. Surveillance photos showed Matthews meeting with high-ranking officers in parking garages. Financial records revealed unexplained deposits in multiple officers' accounts. Internal memos documented suspicious transfers and promotions. This is bigger than we imagined, Marcus said, his voice heavy. The stack of evidence on his desk seemed to grow taller by the minute. Zoe nodded, adding another document to their collection. What we've uncovered here, she said, gesturing to their work. It's not just about bad apples anymore. This is about the whole orchard. They stood together over the table of damning evidence, the weight of their discovery settling over them like a heavy blanket. Years of systematic corruption lay exposed before them in black and white, a network of protection and privilege that had allowed officers like Noah to operate without consequences. Marcus sat at his kitchen table, staring at the threatening note in his hands. The paper trembled slightly as he read the typed message again. Back off or face the consequences. Next to him, Zoe leaned forward, her face tight with concern. That's the third one this week, she said quietly. And the phone calls are getting worse. Marcus nodded, placing the note carefully in a manila envelope with the others. They know we're onto something big. These aren't just random intimidation tactics. A sharp knock at the door made them both jump. It was Maya, bursting in with Malik close behind her. Their faces were flushed from running. Dad, that car is back again, Maya said, catching her breath. The black sedan with tinted windows. Malik moved to the window, carefully peering out through the blinds. It's been circling the block for the past hour. Same one we saw yesterday and the day before. Marcus joined his son at the window. Sure enough, A dark sedan was idling across the street, its engine running. The windows were too dark to make out any faces inside. "That's it," Zoe declared, pulling out her phone. "We need to take this to the feds. Local authorities might be compromised, and this is bigger than we thought." Marcus watched as the car slowly pulled away from the curb. His children's safety had to come first. "Make the call," he agreed. Within hours, 2 FBI agents sat in Marcus's living room, poring over the evidence they'd gathered. Special Agent Thompson, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, studied the threatening notes while her partner documented everything on his laptop. "This is substantial," Thompson said, looking up at Marcus. "The pattern of corruption you've uncovered, combined with these threats, warrants immediate federal intervention." "We'll need protection," Zoe pointed out. "They're watching our homes, following our movements." "Already arranged," Thompson assured them. "We're placing surveillance teams around both your residences, and we'll have agents accompanying you when necessary." Maya and Malik exchanged worried glances. "What about school?" Malik asked. "If they're watching the house, they probably know our routines too." "We'll have plainclothes officers monitoring the school," Thompson's partner explained. "Your safety is our priority while we investigate these allegations." Marcus gathered his children close, feeling the weight of what they'd stumbled into. The evidence they'd uncovered pointed to years of systematic corruption, with tentacles reaching far beyond Noah's case. The network of corrupt officers had worked together to protect their own, burying complaints and intimidating witnesses. "We're assigning a task force specifically to this case," Thompson said, standing up. "What you've uncovered here could help us dismantle similar networks across the state." A black SUV pulled up outside, and 2 more agents emerged. Thompson gestured toward them through the window. "That's your protection detail. They'll maintain a presence here around the clock." Marcus watched as the agents conducted a thorough sweep of his property's perimeter. Zoe placed a supportive hand on his shoulder, her expression resolute. "We knew this might get dangerous," she said softly. "But we're not backing down now." The agents moved efficiently through their security protocols, setting up surveillance equipment and establishing communication channels. Marcus and his family received strict safety guidelines and emergency procedures to follow. As the federal agents finished their initial setup, Thompson turned to Marcus and Zoe. "We'll need you both to come in tomorrow for detailed statements. For now, stay alert and report any suspicious activity immediately." In the dim fluorescent lighting of the federal office, Marcus, Zoe, and Emily sat side by side, their shoulders tense. The room felt smaller than it was, with its bare walls and the heavy weight of anticipation hanging in the air. FBI agent Rachel Hartley stood before them, her dark suit crisp and her expression serious. "What we're proposing isn't without risk," Agent Hartley said, spreading photos across the metal table. "These officers have operated unchecked for years. They're dangerous and well-connected." Marcus leaned forward, his hands clasped together. "I understand the risks, Agent Hartley, but I've spent my life teaching kids to stand up for what's right. I can't back down now." Zoe nodded, her eyes meeting Marcus's. "We've come too far to stop." Emily twisted her wedding ring nervously. "I'll help however I can. Noah. He talks in his sleep sometimes. He keeps files in his home office." Agent Hartley outlined the operation, pointing to surveillance photos and network diagrams. "Marcus, you'll approach Officer Reed first. He's our way in. Zoe, we need documented testimonies, as many as you can get. Emily, anything you can safely gather from home could be crucial." The plan took shape over the next few hours. Marcus would present himself as a concerned father, worried about police harassment of his children. It wasn't far from the truth, which made it perfect cover. Days later, Marcus met Officer Reed at a local diner. The officer's swagger barely concealed his nervousness as Marcus shared his concerns. "Look, we all want to protect our families," Reed said, stirring his coffee endlessly. "Sometimes that means understanding how things really work." Meanwhile, Zoe organized community meetings under the guise of planning a neighborhood watch program. In living rooms and church basements, she recorded story after story. An elderly woman described missing evidence from her grandson's case. A teenager showed cell phone footage of officers planting drugs. Emily moved through her own home like a ghost, carefully photographing documents when Noah was at work. Her hands shook as she forwarded emails to the FBI. Emails that revealed a network far more extensive than they'd imagined. Marcus gained access to higher-level meetings wearing a wire beneath his jacket. His heart pounded as corrupt officers discussed payoffs and cover-ups, but his voice remained steady. "We need to protect our own," he agreed, watching them nod in approval. The FBI moved with precision. Dawn raids caught officers at their homes, evidence seized before it could be destroyed. Agent Hartley coordinated from a mobile command center, directing teams across the city. At the press conference, cameras flashed as Agent Hartley announced the arrests. Reporters shouted questions. On the streets, people gathered around televisions in shop windows and phones streaming the news. Some cheered. Others watched in silent disbelief. Marcus, Zoe, and Emily stood at the back of the crowd, their faces showing the exhaustion and relief of people who had carried a heavy burden for too long. Their eyes met in a moment of shared understanding, a quiet acknowledgement of what they had accomplished together. The community center buzzed with anticipation as Zoe took her place at the podium. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice rang clear and strong through the packed room. "Today, we're not just starting an organization," she announced, scanning the sea of familiar faces. "We're building a movement. Voices for Justice will be our platform to fight discrimination and support those who faced misconduct." In the front row, Malik and Maya sat straight-backed, their eyes fixed on Zoe. Maya squeezed her brother's hand as Zoe continued outlining her vision for change. "We need young voices," Zoe said. "We need fresh perspectives and new energy." She smiled as the twins nodded enthusiastically. After the presentation, Malik and Maya rushed to meet Zoe at the side of the stage. "Count us in," Maya said, her eyes sparkling with determination. "I can help with social media and artwork." "And I want to speak at events," Malik added quietly but firmly. "People need to hear our story." The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Zoe spent countless hours in meetings, filling out paperwork and making phone calls. Emily's experience proved invaluable as they navigated the complex world of nonprofit regulations. At their first rally, Malik stood before a crowd of hundreds. His hands were steady as he gripped the microphone. "I never thought I'd be here," he began, his voice soft but clear. "But sometimes life pushes you to speak up." He shared the story of that day at the basketball court, his words painting a vivid picture that left many in tears. Maya threw herself into the creative side of their mission. Her artwork began appearing around the city, powerful images that spoke of both pain and hope. She organized an exhibition called Through Our Eyes, featuring artwork by local youth who had experienced discrimination. "Look at this," Maya said one afternoon, showing Zoe her latest design for their social media campaign. The image showed hands of different colors joined in a circle, with the words, "Stand Together," emblazoned across the top. Their first grant came through on a rainy Tuesday morning. Zoe stared at the email in disbelief before calling Emily. "We did it," she whispered into the phone. "We can actually make this work." The protest march they organized drew thousands. Maya's posters bobbed above the crowd like colorful butterflies, while Malik led chants that echoed through the streets. News cameras captured it all, broadcasting their message far beyond their city. Later that day, Zoe sat in her new office, a small room with just enough space for a desk and a few chairs. The walls were already filling up with Maya's artwork and letters from community members. Her phone rang, and she picked it up to hear a producer from a national news network on the other end. "We'd like to feature your organization in a segment about grassroots activism," the producer said. "Your work is making waves." Emily sat in the courtroom, her hands folded neatly in her lap as she faced Noah across the polished wooden table. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows on his face, making him look older and more worn than she remembered. Their lawyer shuffled papers between them, the soft rustle the only sound breaking the tense silence. "Just sign here, Mrs. Ryder," the lawyer said, sliding the divorce papers toward her. Emily noticed he'd already stopped calling her by her married name. As she picked up the pen, her mind drifted back to 3 weeks ago. The memory was still fresh, like a movie playing in her head. "You can't do this, Emily," Noah had shouted, watching her pack her clothes into a large suitcase. "Everything I did to protect us, to protect our community." Emily had continued folding her sweaters, her movements deliberate and calm. "There's nothing left to protect, Noah. You destroyed that yourself." "It wasn't like that. You don't understand what it's like out there." His voice had cracked with desperation. But Emily hadn't looked back as she wheeled her suitcase to the door. The sound of it rolling across their hardwood floors had felt like a final countdown. Now, sitting in the community center's small office 6 months later, Emily found herself surrounded by family photos and case files. A woman sat across from her, clutching a tissue, her eyes red from crying. "Mrs. Johnson?" Emily said softly, reaching across the desk to touch the woman's hand. "We're going to help you through this. You're not alone anymore." The woman nodded, dabbing at her eyes. "I never thought I'd find anyone who understood, who would believe me." Emily spent her days like this now, working alongside Zoe at Voices for Justice. She helped families navigate the complex legal system, offering both practical support and emotional comfort. The work filled a void she hadn't known existed during her marriage to Noah. One afternoon, while organizing files for an upcoming case, Marcus stopped by her office. He leaned against the doorframe, a gentle smile on his face. "You're doing amazing work here, Emily," he said. "These families, they trust you because you understand both sides." Emily looked up from her paperwork. "I just wish I'd understood sooner, seen the signs earlier." "Hey," Marcus said, stepping into the office. "You did something about it when you did see it. That's what matters." Together, they began working on expanding the support network. Emily's experience as a police officer's wife gave her unique insight into the system, while Marcus's leadership in the community helped build trust with skeptical families. At the latest support group meeting, Emily watched as mothers, fathers, siblings, and children shared their stories. The circle of metal folding chairs held people from all walks of life, united by their experiences with police misconduct. Some cried as they spoke, others sat in silent solidarity. Finally, Emily stood before the group, her heart full of purpose. "When I left my husband," she began, her voice steady and clear, "I thought I was walking away from everything I knew. But I was actually walking toward everything I needed to become." Marcus sat in the front row of the city council chambers, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. The room buzzed with energy as protesters filled every available space, their signs held high above their heads. "Justice now" and "Reform the Police" were written in bold letters against white poster board. Next to him, Zoe's face was set with determination, her eyes fixed on the council members seated at their elevated platform. Council President Richardson cleared his throat, tapping his gavel. "We're here today to discuss Bill 2741 concerning police reform measures." His voice echoed through the packed chamber. The first speaker, Councilwoman Chen, leaned into her microphone. "This bill proposes mandatory body cameras for all officers, an independent civilian review board, and comprehensive diversity training. These are reasonable steps toward accountability." From the other side of the chamber, Councilman Peters shook his head. "This bill will hamstring our officers and make their jobs impossible. The police union has made it clear." A chorus of boos erupted from the crowd. Marcus watched as Zoe pulled out her phone, quickly typing messages to her network of supporters. Within minutes, more protesters began streaming into the overflow area outside. During the public comment period, Marcus approached the podium. His voice was steady as he addressed the council. "My children deserve to grow up in a city where they don't fear the people sworn to protect them. My late wife..." He paused, swallowing hard. "She always believed in the power of change." The police union representatives presented next, armed with statistics and dire predictions. "Crime rates will soar," they warned. "Officers will quit in droves." But Zoe was ready. She organized daily rallies outside City Hall, her voice carrying through a megaphone as she led chants for justice. National news vans lined the streets, their cameras capturing the growing movement. Marcus took a different approach. He requested private meetings with council members, particularly focusing on Councilwoman Martinez, known to be the swing vote. Over coffee in her office, He shared stories of his family's experiences, of the fear that gripped his children's hearts whenever they saw a police car. "I understand the concerns about public safety," he told her, his voice gentle but firm. "But true safety comes from trust between police and community. Right now, that trust is broken." Martinez listened intently, her expression softening as Marcus described his late wife's dedication to community service and her belief in justice for all. The day of the final vote arrived. The chamber was silent as Richardson called for the roll call. One by one, council members stated their positions. When Martinez's turn came, she sat up straight, her voice clear. "Yes." The crowd erupted. Cheers and sobs filled the air as people hugged each other. Marcus turned to Zoe, tears streaming down his face. They embraced tightly, years of struggle culminating in this moment of victory. Outside, the streets filled with celebration. Justice for all. The chant started softly, then grew louder and louder, echoing through the night air. Marcus and Zoe stood on the steps of City Hall, surrounded by their community, their voices joining the chorus of hope and triumph. Marcus stood in the heart of Riverside Park, where cherry blossoms danced on the spring breeze. His hand rested on the cool metal of the newly installed plaque, its polished surface catching the morning light. "The Angela Harper Scholarship Fund, honoring resilience," he read silently, his fingers tracing each letter. Beside him, Malik and Maya stood tall, their presence a steady comfort. Zoe stood just behind them, clipboard in hand, organizing the small crowd of community members who had gathered for the unveiling. The park had been Angela's sanctuary, where she'd spent countless hours grading papers and dreaming up ways to help her students succeed. "My wife believed education was the key to transformation," Marcus's voice carried across the gathered crowd. "This scholarship fund will continue her mission, opening doors for students who face the same barriers she once did." The following week saw Marcus throwing himself into the work of establishing the fund. His dining room table disappeared under stacks of applications and donor paperwork. Late into the night, he made calls to potential contributors, sharing Angela's story and his vision for change. "We've got another major donor on board," Zoe announced one afternoon, bursting into Marcus's classroom after school. "The Richardson Foundation wants to match all donations up to $50,000. The first scholarship selection meeting was held in the community center. Marcus, along with a panel of educators and community leaders, pored over applications. 3 stories stood out among the rest. There was Deshaun Williams, whose mother worked 3 jobs to keep him in school. Despite everything, he maintained straight A's and ran a tutoring program for younger kids in his housing complex. Maria Gonzalez, who translated for her immigrant parents while maintaining honor roll status and fighting for ESL resources in her school. And finally, Tanya Brooks, who overcame homelessness to become her class valedictorian. At the awards ceremony, each recipient shared their story. Tanya's voice shook as she spoke. "This scholarship isn't just money for college. It's proof that someone believes in us, that our dreams matter." Maya's contribution took shape on the park's concrete wall adjacent to the playground. Her mural bloomed over several days, a vibrant portrait of Angela surrounded by symbols of education, justice, and community. Children would stop their play to watch her work, asking questions about the woman in the painting. "That's Mrs. Harper," Maya would explain, her paintbrush moving steadily. "She believed every child deserves a chance to shine." The mural became a gathering spot, a symbol of hope that drew people from all corners of the community. Parents would point to it while telling their children about Angela's legacy, about the importance of education and perseverance. On dedication day, Marcus watched as Maya put the finishing touches on her work. Zoe organized the crowd, making sure the scholarship recipients had front row seats. Malik helped set up chairs and handed out programs, each one featuring Angela's favorite quote about education being the pathway to freedom. Marcus stood before the gathered crowd, his children flanking him on either side. Looking out at the faces of the scholarship recipients, the community members, and the young children playing nearby, he felt Angela's presence more strongly than ever. The late afternoon sun cast a warm glow over Jefferson Park as laughter and chatter filled the air. Colorful balloons danced in the gentle breeze, tied to tables laden with steaming casseroles, fresh salads, and homemade desserts. Children darted between the picnic tables, their gleeful shrieks mixing with the sounds of casual conversation. Malik and Maya worked together, carefully unfurling a large banner between two trees. "A little higher on your end," Maya called out to her brother, adjusting her grip. The banner finally hung straight, its message clear against the blue sky. Stronger together, a celebration of unity and hope. "Perfect," Malik said, stepping back to admire their handiwork. His eyes swept across the gathering crowd, taking in the familiar faces that had become like family over the past months. Mrs. Johnson, who'd lost her son to police violence, was sharing her famous potato salad recipe with Emily. The Rodriguez family, who'd testified before the city council, had brought enough tamales to feed an army. Near the playground, Zoe stood surrounded by reporters, her voice carrying clearly as she spoke. "This isn't just about what we've overcome," she explained, gesturing to the diverse crowd. "It's about the bonds we've formed and the change we've created together." Marcus stepped up to a small podium set up near a freshly dug hole where the commemorative tree would be planted. The chatter died down as he cleared his throat. "This oak sapling," he began, his voice strong and clear, "represents more than just growth. Its roots will grow deep, just as our commitment to justice has. Its branches will reach wide, like the arms of this community embracing one another." As Marcus and several community leaders carefully placed the young oak into the ground, a hush fell over the gathering. Everyone observed a moment of silence, heads bowed in remembrance of those who hadn't lived to see this day of celebration. The solemnity was broken by the gentle strumming of guitars as the local band, comprised of high school students, began to play. Their original song, written specifically for the occasion, spoke of darkness turned to light and strangers becoming family. Many wiped away tears as the young voices sang of hope and perseverance. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the park, Malik and Maya stood together, raising their glasses of lemonade. Malik's voice wavered slightly as he addressed the crowd. "Looking around, I see strength I never knew existed. I see friends who became family. I see hope that grew from despair." Maya stepped forward, her eyes bright with emotion. "We didn't just survive, we found each other, and that made us unstoppable." The sound of clinking glasses filled the air, mixing with appreciative applause and the continued laughter of playing children. Behind them, the newly planted oak stood tall against the evening sky, its leaves rustling gently in the breeze, a living symbol of their shared journey and enduring strength. Zoe sat at her desk, surrounded by multiple screens displaying an overwhelming flood of messages. News clips played silently on one monitor, showing protests and community meetings across the country. Her email inbox pinged constantly with new messages from people sharing their stories and asking for guidance. "Look at this one," she called out to Maya, who was helping organize the incoming correspondence. "A group in Atlanta started their own youth advocacy program based on our model." Maya leaned over, her eyes scanning the message. "They've already got 50 students signed up. That's amazing." Social media notifications streamed in steadily. Justice United and Agrib Ripple Effect were trending, accompanied by powerful images of communities coming together, holding signs with quotes from Malik and Maya's speeches. Later that afternoon, Zoe adjusted her webcam and straightened her shoulders as faces began populating her screen for the virtual leadership summit. Community organizers from Chicago, Houston, Miami, and dozens of other cities joined the call. "Welcome, everyone," Zoe began, her voice warm but determined. "Seeing all of you here today proves what we've always believed. That change is possible when we stand together." A woman from Detroit shared how her organization had successfully pushed for police reform legislation. A teenager in Los Angeles described a school program that brought students and law enforcement together for honest dialogues. While Zoe led the meeting, Malik and Maya sat in their living room with Marcus, watching the first episode of Ripples of Change on their TV. The documentary opened with footage from their initial protest, then cut to present-day interviews. It feels surreal, Malik whispered as he watched himself on screen describing the day that changed their lives. I never thought our story would reach so many people. Maya squeezed his hand. Look at the comments coming in already, she said, holding up her phone. Thousands of viewers were sharing their reactions in real time, many describing how the twins' courage had inspired them to speak up in their own communities. Marcus watched his children with quiet pride. The documentary showed them speaking at schools, leading workshops, and working with young activists. It captured their growth from scared teenagers to confident young leaders who hadn't let fear silence them. The following week, Zoe's office buzzed with activity as they launched the Justice United Mentorship Program. Survivors of police misconduct were paired with experienced advocates who could guide them through both healing and activism. Remember, Zoe told the first group of mentors, everyone's journey is different. Some might need time to process their trauma before they're ready to speak out. Others might want to jump straight into action. Our job is to support them either way. The program's launch coincided with a massive march in Washington, D.C. Marcus delivered a powerful speech about the importance of sustained activism. Real change doesn't happen overnight, he reminded the crowd. It happens through countless small actions, through showing up day after day, through refusing to let the world forget that every life matters. The late spring sun cast a golden glow across the university quad as Malik and Maya Black stood side by side in their crimson graduation gowns. Their matching caps were decorated with messages of hope and justice. Malik's reading "Change starts here," and Maya's proclaiming "The future is now." Marcus Black watched from the front row, tears glistening in his eyes. His children had grown into powerful advocates while excelling in their studies. The journey flashed through his mind. Malik pulling all-nighters to finish papers while preparing speeches for rallies. Maya balancing her artwork for protests with her sociology coursework. I'm so proud of you both, Marcus whispered, pulling them into a tight embrace after the ceremony. The moment was captured by dozens of cameras. Their story had become larger than life. Later that afternoon, the park was packed with hundreds of supporters. The same trees that had witnessed their community picnic years ago now provided shade for an even larger gathering. Banners waved in the breeze, and children sat on their parents' shoulders to get a better view. Malik stepped up to the microphone first. When Maya and I were younger, we experienced something that could have broken us, he said, his voice steady and strong. Instead, it ignited a fire. We learned that pain can be transformed into purpose. Maya joined him, their shoulders touching. We stand here today not just as college graduates, but as living proof that change is possible. Our community showed us that love is stronger than fear, that unity can overcome division. Marcus approached the podium holding a crystal award inscribed with their names. The Angela Harper Youth Leadership Award, he announced, goes to 2 individuals who turned tragedy into triumph. His voice cracked with emotion as he presented it to his children. Zoe took the stage next, her presence commanding as ever. Justice United started in this very community, she declared. Today, we have chapters in 12 countries. Malik and Maya showed us that age is no barrier to creating change. A small girl, no more than 7 years old, tugged on Maya's gown. In her hands, she held a crayon drawing of 2 figures standing tall, surrounded by hearts and stars. This is you and Malik, she said shyly. You helped make things better. Maya knelt down to the child's level, accepting the drawing with gentle hands. Malik joined her, and they shared a knowing look. This was why they had fought so hard. Standing together on the makeshift stage, the siblings faced their community. Their hands found each other, fingers intertwining just as they had done countless times before. Maya's voice rang out clear and true. Together we can make the world a better place. The crowd erupted in thunderous applause, their cheers echoing across the park. Hundreds of faces beamed back at them, each one a testament to the power of perseverance and unity. The community they had helped build stood strong and vibrant, ready to carry their message forward. Noah's footsteps echoed through the warehouse as he moved cautiously forward, his police instincts screaming at him that something wasn't right. The dim light filtering through dusty windows cast long shadows across the concrete floor. His heart hammered against his ribs as he spotted Emily standing near the center of the space, her face unreadable in the half-light. But she wasn't alone. As his eyes adjusted, he made out other figures emerging from the shadows. Their faces came into focus one by one, and though he didn't immediately recognize them, there was something haunting in their expressions, a mix of anger and pain that made his stomach clench. "Emily," he said, his voice catching, "are you okay?" She didn't respond, her silence more unsettling than any words could have been. Instead, it was Zoe who stepped forward, her shoulders squared and chin lifted with purpose. "She's fine," Zoe said firmly, "which is more than can be said for many others who've crossed your path." Noah's hand instinctively moved toward where his service weapon would have been, but found nothing. Old habits died hard. He forced himself to keep his voice steady. "What is this about?" Murmurs rippled through the gathered crowd. Someone sobbed quietly in the background. Noah counted at least 15 people, their eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made him want to retreat. "This," Zoe said, gesturing to the group, "is about accountability. These people are here because of you, Officer Ryder. Because of your actions, your choices." The murmuring grew louder. A woman near the front clutched her teenage son's shoulder, tears streaming down her face. An elderly man leaned heavily on his cane, his weathered face tight with barely contained emotion. "I don't understand," Noah said, but even as the words left his mouth, recognition began to creep in. The teenager with his mother. Hadn't he pulled them over last summer? The old man with the cane, that noise complaint call that got out of hand. Emily finally spoke, her voice soft but clear. "You need to listen, Noah. Really listen. For once in your life, just stop and listen." Zoe moved closer, her presence commanding the space. "These people have stories to tell. Stories about abuse of power, about fear, about lives changed forever, because one police officer decided he was above the law." Noah's throat felt dry. He looked from face to face, memories surfacing like bubbles in murky water. Each person represented a moment, a decision, an interaction he'd convinced himself was justified at the time. "You know them," Zoe said, her voice cutting through his thoughts. "Don't you?" Noah remained silent, his world shrinking to this moment, this confrontation. The weight of all those eyes, all those stories, pressed in on him like a physical force. His carefully constructed defenses began to crack under the pressure of their collective truth. Emily watched him, her expression a mixture of sadness and determination. She had chosen her side, and it wasn't with him anymore. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. In the dim warehouse, the first victim stepped forward. Sarah Martinez, a young mother, stood tall despite her trembling hands. "You pulled me over 3 times in 2 weeks," she said, her voice gaining strength. "Each time you made me feel less than human. You threatened to call child services when my baby was crying in the back seat." Noah's throat tightened as he recognized her face. Before he could respond, another person emerged from the group. James Wilson, an elderly black man, leaned on his cane as he spoke. "You and your partner roughed me up while I was walking home from church. Said I fit a description. I was 72 years old." The stories continued, each one hitting Noah like a physical blow. A teenager described being slammed against a wall during a stop and frisk. A college student recalled being threatened with arrest for recording police activity. A shop owner detailed months of harassment and unnecessary inspections. Zoe stepped into the center of the group, her eyes locked on Noah. "These aren't just isolated incidents, are they, Officer Ryder?" She pulled out a folder. "We have documentation, dates, times, witness statements, a pattern of targeting specific communities." Noah's mouth went dry. "I was just doing my job," he mumbled, but the words sounded hollow even to his own ears. "Your job?" Zoe's voice cut through the air. "Was it your job to terrorize innocent people? To abuse your power? To make people fear those who should protect them?" The weight of every story, every accusation pressed down on Noah's shoulders. His knees buckled, and he sank to the concrete floor. I never meant. The excuses died in his throat as he looked at the faces around him, faces of people he'd hurt, lives he'd impacted. "Please," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." Tears streamed down his face as years of denial crumbled away. I didn't want to see what I was doing." Emily watched from the side, her arms crossed as her husband broke down. The man she'd loved, the father of her children, finally confronting the truth about himself. "I'll do anything," Noah pleaded, looking up at Zoe and the group. "Please, tell me how to make this right." The warehouse fell silent, the only sound Noah's ragged breathing. Zoe stepped closer, her expression a mix of disgust and pity. "It's too late for apologies, Noah," she said firmly. "Now, it's time to face the consequences." Noah's hands shook as he accepted the thick manila folder from Zoe. Papers rustled as he opened it, his eyes widening at the mountain of evidence before him. The dim warehouse lighting cast long shadows across his face as he flipped through page after damning page. Malik stepped forward, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to Noah's visible distress. "We have everything," he said, his voice steady and clear. "Security footage from the incidents, sworn testimonies from witnesses, phone records, even your own body camera footage that mysteriously disappeared from official records." Marcus moved to stand beside Malik, his presence commanding attention. "There's a detailed timeline here," he explained, reaching over to tap the folder. "Every incident, every abuse of power, every moment you chose to harm rather than protect our community." Noah's face grew pale as he continued scanning the documents. His hands trembled more violently now, causing some papers to slip onto the concrete floor. The sound echoed through the warehouse, emphasizing the heavy silence. "You have two choices," Marcus continued, his voice firm but controlled. "You can come clean, make a public confession and resign from the force, or we take this entire file to the media and the police internal affairs division." Noah's head snapped up, panic flashing across his face. "I need time to think," he stammered, trying to close the folder. "No." Zoe's voice cut through the air like a knife. "No more delays. No more excuses." Emily, who had been silent until now, stepped forward. Her voice quavered with emotion as she spoke. "How could you, Noah? I trusted you. I believed in you." Tears welled in her eyes, but her voice grew stronger. "I defended you to others, told them you were one of the good ones, but this..." She gestured at the folder. "This shows you betrayed everything we built together. Everything we believed in." Noah's shoulders slumped as Emily's words hit home. He looked around the warehouse, taking in the faces of his victims, each one a testament to his failures. The weight of his actions seemed to physically press down on him. He started, but Zoe cut him off. "We don't want excuses," she said firmly. "We want accountability." Noah's facade crumbled completely. His voice barely above a whisper, he asked, "What do you want from me?" Zoe stepped closer, her eyes locked on his. "The truth. Publicly. Now." The social media storm began quietly at first, just a few posts trickling onto Twitter and Facebook. Anonymous accounts shared snippets of encounters with a certain police officer, carefully worded to avoid direct accusations while painting a clear picture of abuse of power. "He pulled me over for no reason," one post read. "Made me stand in the rain while he searched my car. Found nothing but still gave me a ticket. My son was walking home from basketball practice when an officer stopped him," another shared. "Treated him like a criminal. My boy was just 14. As the stories multiplied, patterns emerged. Dates, locations, and details aligned perfectly. The victims, guided by Zoe's strategic planning, created a powerful narrative that couldn't be ignored. Local news stations began picking up the story, running segments about allegations of systematic discrimination within the police force. Noah noticed the shift at work first. Colleagues avoided eye contact. Conversations stopped when he entered the break room. His phone buzzed constantly with notifications as more stories appeared online. "Officer Ryder," the police chief's secretary called out one morning. The chief wants to see you. Now. Noah's footsteps echoed through the empty hallway as he approached the chief's office. Through the glass walls, he could see Chief Thompson's stern expression, a stack of printouts on his desk. "Sit down," Thompson ordered as Noah entered. "Care to explain this?" He spread out several papers, screenshots of the viral posts. Noah's throat went dry. "Sir, Save it," Thompson cut him off. "These accusations are gaining traction. The mayor's office is breathing down my neck. The department's reputation is on the line." Outside the office, Noah could see other officers gathering, pretending not to watch. The chief's voice grew harder. "If there's any truth to these stories, Ryder, you better come clean now. Because once the media circus really starts, there's nothing I can do to protect you." Noah shifted uncomfortably in his chair, sweat beading on his forehead. The chief's words seemed to echo in the small office. "Nothing I can do to protect you." As Noah left the building that afternoon, a wall of reporters waited at the bottom of the steps. Camera flashes exploded around him as microphones thrust toward his face. "Officer Ryder, what's your response to the allegations? Is there systematic racism in the department? Will you be resigning?" The questions came rapid fire as Noah pushed through the crowd, keeping his head down. He could feel the weight of the cameras, the eyes of the public all focused on him. His carefully constructed world was crumbling, and there was nowhere left to hide. In the dimly lit corner of Bean and Brew, Zoe drummed her fingers nervously on the worn wooden table. The late afternoon crowd provided perfect cover for their clandestine meeting. Emily slipped into the seat across from her, her face partially hidden by oversized sunglasses. "I found something," Zoe whispered, leaning forward. "In Noah's office. A journal." Emily's eyebrows rose above her sunglasses. "What kind of journal?" "The kind that proves everything." Zoe pulled her bag closer. "He wrote it all down, Emily. Every encounter, every justification he made to himself. It's like he needed to explain away his guilt." Emily removed her sunglasses, her eyes wide. "Let me see." Zoe carefully slid the leather-bound notebook across the table. Emily's hands trembled as she flipped through the pages, her face growing paler with each turn. "This is..." Emily's voice caught. "This is exactly what we needed." "I have someone in mind," Emily continued, closing the journal. "Maria Perez. She's an investigative journalist who broke that corruption story last year about the city council. She's fearless, Zoe. She won't back down no matter what pressure they put on her." "Can you trust her?" "Completely. She protects her sources and she's thorough. She won't publish anything she can't verify." Later that week, Emily met Maria in a quiet park. The journalist's sharp eyes missed nothing as Emily handed over the carefully wrapped journal. "This is serious," Maria said, thumbing through the pages. Her professional demeanor didn't mask her growing interest. "Very serious." "We know," Emily replied. "That's why we came to you." Maria looked up from the journal. "If he doesn't come forward himself, I'll run the story. But I'll need time to verify everything, cross-reference dates, interview people discreetly." Meanwhile, across town, Noah stood at another community podium, his voice steady but hollow. "I've always served this community with integrity," he declared to a skeptical audience. "These accusations are unfortunate misunderstandings." Back in the park, Maria tucked the journal into her bag. "I'll be in touch," she assured Emily. "One way or another, the truth will come out." Emily watched her walk away, feeling both relief and apprehension. On her phone, a news alert showed Noah's latest press statement, his face plastered across the screen as he continued to deny any wrongdoing. Noah stood at the podium, his hands trembling as he adjusted the microphone. Camera flashes lit up the packed conference room like lightning strikes. Journalists leaned forward in their seats, pens poised over notepads. In the back, community activists held signs demanding justice and reform. Noah's voice cracked. He cleared his throat and started again. "I come before you today with a heavy heart." His prepared statement rustled in his shaking hands. Sweat beaded on his forehead under the harsh lights. The room fell silent, waiting. Over my years of service, I made choices that hurt people. Choices that betrayed the badge I wore and the community I swore to protect. His words came out rehearsed, hollow. I want to apologize to those I've wronged. From the crowd, someone shouted, "Names! Say their names!" Noah flinched but continued reading. I've done a lot of soul-searching. I realize now that my actions were inappropriate. Therefore, I am announcing my resignation from the police force, effective immediately. Malik stood up from his seat in the front row. Inappropriate? You terrorized innocent people. You abused your power systematically for years. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Noah dabbed at his forehead with a handkerchief. I know I can't undo the past, he stammered. But I hope my resignation shows that I'm trying to make amends. This isn't about you, Malik's voice rang out clear and strong. This is about a broken system that protected you while you violated people's rights. We need real change, not empty gestures. The crowd erupted in approval. Journalists shouted questions. Officer Ryder, what about the allegations of racial profiling? Will you cooperate with investigations into department misconduct? Are there others involved in covering up your actions? Noah backed away from the podium. I have no further comments at this time. Thank you. As he turned to leave, the room exploded with angry voices. Signs waved in the air as people began chanting, "Systemic change, not hollow words." Maria Perez watched from her seat, notebook in hand, her expression grim as Noah was hustled out through a back door by his handlers. The conference dissolved into chaos, with activists taking over the microphone to demand accountability while security tried to restore order. Their voices echoed through the building as Noah slipped away, leaving behind a storm of outrage and calls for justice. The precinct's conference room buzzed with tension as officers gathered to discuss Noah's resignation. Sergeant Miller, a veteran of 20 years, slammed his fist on the table. "This is ridiculous. We're throwing Noah under the bus to appease the mob." Officer Rodriguez shook her head. "It's not about appeasing anyone. It's about accountability. Noah's actions reflect poorly on all of us." The room erupted into heated arguments. Officers took sides, some defending Noah as a victim of circumstance while others pointed to his history of complaints. Coffee cups rattled as voices rose, faces reddened with anger. Marcus stood at the back of the room watching the chaos unfold. When he finally spoke, his voice cut through the noise. "This isn't just about Noah, it's about a system that allowed his behavior to continue unchecked for years." Several officers turned to glare at him, but Marcus held his ground. "We need to look at the bigger picture. How many other incidents have we ignored? How many times have we looked the other way?" The city council members arrived just as the debate reached its peak. Councilwoman Chen's presence commanded immediate attention. "We've heard your concerns," she announced. "That's why we're proposing a task force to investigate these issues thoroughly." Her words sparked another round of protest from the old guard. Officer Thompson, a close friend of Noah's, scoffed. "A witch hunt, that's what this is." But Marcus saw an opportunity. He stepped forward, addressing the council directly. "I volunteer to serve on this task force. We need officers who understand both sides of this issue." Behind the scenes, Zoe and Emily worked tirelessly, gathering testimonies and documentation. They provided Marcus with the ammunition he needed to make his case for reform. The conservative faction within the department wasn't idle. In break rooms and parking lots, they whispered about ways to obstruct the investigation. Some suggested a work slowdown, while others talked about pressuring witnesses to stay quiet. When Marcus walked into the first task force meeting, he saw familiar faces from the community alongside legal experts and fellow officers. The room was quiet, but the tension remained palpable. Each person present knew they were part of something bigger than themselves, a chance for real change, if they could overcome the resistance that lay ahead. Marcus sat at his desk, grading papers in the quiet afternoon light when his phone buzzed. A new email notification caught his eye. The sender was anonymous, the subject line simply reading, "Truth." His hand trembled slightly as he opened it. "Look deeper," Noah wasn't alone. Check personnel file NAR 4873B. Follow the money trail from the Anderson case. More will come. The cryptic message ended with a string of numbers that looked like dates and case file references. Marcus immediately called Zoe. "I need you to see this," he said, his voice tight with urgency. Within 30 minutes, she was at his house, leaning over his shoulder to read the email. "These dates," Zoe muttered, scribbling them down. "They match up with several controversial arrests from the past few years." Her investigative instincts kicked in as she started cross-referencing the information. They spent hours hunched over laptops and papers spread across Marcus's dining room table. The personnel file number led them to Officer James Reed, who had been involved in multiple excessive force complaints but never faced consequences. "Look at this," Zoe said, pointing to her screen. Reed's partner during the Anderson case was transferred right after filing a formal complaint. The complaint mysteriously disappeared from records, but I found a backup copy in the city archives. Marcus pulled up bank records that showed suspicious patterns. These officers, Reed, Martinez, Thompson, they all received unusual payments from the same shell company right after major incidents. A knock at the door made them both jump. Standing there was a middle-aged man in a wrinkled suit, his eyes darting nervously. "I'm Detective Wilson," he whispered. "I sent the email. There's so much more you need to know." Inside, Wilson's hands shook as he laid out years of evidence he'd secretly gathered. "It's a network," he explained. "They protect each other, destroy evidence, intimidate witnesses. Noah was just one part of it." Surveillance footage showed officers planting evidence. Internal memos revealed systematic cover-ups of misconduct. Financial records pointed to bribes and kickbacks. Each piece of evidence painted a darker picture. "They threatened my family when I tried to report it internally," Wilson said, his voice breaking. "I've been gathering evidence for years, waiting for the right moment, for people I could trust." Zoe methodically organized everything into clear categories: financial crimes, abuse of power, witness tampering, and more. The evidence was overwhelming. Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders as he realized the true scope of what they'd uncovered. As evening fell, Marcus and Zoe stood over the dining room table, now covered with damning documents, photos, and files. Stacks of evidence that revealed a corruption far deeper than they'd imagined. The silence between them was heavy with the knowledge that their fight for justice had just become much bigger and more dangerous than either of them had anticipated. Marcus's phone buzzed with another anonymous text message. His hands trembled slightly as he read the threatening words, "Back off or else." It was the third such message this week. He glanced out his living room window, scanning the quiet suburban street. Across town, Zoe sat at her kitchen table, staring at a plain white envelope that had been slipped under her door. Inside was a single photograph, her walking to her car the previous morning. On the back, someone had scrawled, "We're watching." The threats became more frequent and bold. One evening, Marcus found his car tires slashed. The next day, Zoe discovered her office ransacked, though nothing appeared stolen. The message was clear. Someone wanted them to stop digging. Malik noticed it first, a dark sedan with tinted windows idling across from their house. He nudged Maya as they walked home from basketball practice. "That car's been there 3 days in a row now," Malik whispered, keeping his eyes forward. Maya nodded slowly. "Same time each day, too. The driver just sits there for hours." They hurried inside to tell their father. Marcus listened intently as his children described the suspicious vehicle. His jaw tightened. This was escalating beyond anonymous threats. That evening, Marcus and Zoe met in a crowded coffee shop, away from prying eyes. "We need help," Marcus said quietly. "This is bigger than us now." Zoe agreed. "I have a contact at the FBI field office. We should share what we found." The next morning, Marcus gathered all their evidence, documents, photos, recordings, threatening messages, and drove to the FBI building downtown. Special Agent Thompson listened gravely as Marcus laid out their case against the corrupt police network. "These threats are serious," Thompson said, examining the anonymous messages. We'll need to put protective details on both you and Ms. Carter immediately." Within hours, federal agents were stationed outside both their homes. Dark SUVs with agents followed their movements. The FBI's forensics team began analyzing the threatening letters for DNA and fingerprints. One evening, Malik and Maya spotted the suspicious sedan again. This time, an FBI vehicle smoothly pulled up behind it. The sedan's driver quickly pulled away, but not before agents got the license plate. The FBI investigation expanded rapidly. Agents interviewed witnesses, tracked financial records, and monitored communications between suspected corrupt officers. They discovered a network far more extensive than anyone had imagined. The chapter's climax arrived when 3 black SUVs pulled up to Marcus's house one evening. Agent Thompson stepped out, along with several other agents in tactical gear. They quickly moved inside. "We have credible intelligence of an imminent threat," Thompson explained tersely. "We need to move you to a safe location." Across the room, Zoe caught Marcus's eye. Neither spoke, but their expressions conveyed their shared determination. The threats meant they were getting close to the truth. In the dimly lit conference room of the federal building, Marcus, Zoe, and Emily sat around a polished wooden table, their shoulders tense. FBI agent Rachel Hartley paced before them, her dark suit crisp and professional, her expression grave. "What we're proposing is extremely dangerous," Agent Hartley said, placing her palms flat on the table. "These officers have been operating with impunity for years. They won't hesitate to protect their interests." Marcus leaned forward, his voice steady despite the nervous energy coursing through him. "I understand the risks, Agent Hartley, but I have connections in the community that could help us get inside." "Tell me more," Agent Hartley said, taking a seat. "Officer Reed, he's been trying to get close to me for months, claims he wants to build bridges with the community. I think he's looking for ways to control the narrative." Zoe nodded, adding, "We could use that. Set up community meetings, gather testimonies while appearing to cooperate." Emily wrung her hands beneath the table. "Noah's been careless lately, leaving files out, taking calls in the open. I could help document everything." Agent Hartley studied each of them carefully. This isn't like the movies. One wrong move could expose everything, or worse. "We know what's at stake," Marcus said firmly. "These officers have hurt too many people. It has to stop." After a long moment, Agent Hartley pulled out a stack of papers. "All right, let's talk specifics. Marcus, you'll need to wear a wire. Zoe, we'll set you up with secure channels to transmit the testimonies. Emily," she paused, her expression softening. "Are you absolutely certain about this? Your position is particularly precarious." Emily straightened in her chair. "I'm sure. I can't stand by anymore." Over the next hour, they detailed the operation. Agent Hartley explained the surveillance equipment, the code words they would use, and the emergency protocols. She emphasized the importance of maintaining their normal routines while gathering evidence. "Remember," she said, "one suspicious move could blow the whole operation. These officers are paranoid and well-connected. They've evaded justice for years because they're careful." Marcus absorbed every detail, his mind already mapping out his approach to Officer Reed. Beside him, Zoe took careful notes about the community members she would need to contact. Emily sat quietly, her face pale but determined. "We'll start tomorrow," Agent Hartley concluded. "The FBI will be monitoring everything. If anything feels wrong, you abort immediately. Understood?" They nodded in unison, the weight of their mission settling heavily on their shoulders. As they gathered their things to leave, Agent Hartley handed each of them a secure phone. "Use these only for emergency contact. They're encrypted, but assume nothing is completely safe." Outside the conference room, the fluorescent lights of the federal building hummed quietly. The 3 conspirators stood close together, sharing a moment of silent understanding before heading their separate ways into the gathering dusk. The community center buzzed with anticipation as Zoe took her place at the podium. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice rang clear and strong through the packed room. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the diverse crowd of faces turned toward her. "Today we begin a new chapter," Zoe announced, her eyes scanning the room. I'm proud to introduce Voices for Justice, an organization dedicated to fighting racial discrimination and supporting those affected by police misconduct. In the front row, Malik and Maya sat forward in their seats, their expressions intense with focus. As Zoe outlined her vision for community healing and systemic change, Maya squeezed her brother's hand. "We need young voices," Zoe continued. "We need artists, speakers, and dreamers who can help us build a better future." Before she could finish, Malik and Maya were on their feet. "Count us in," Maya called out, her voice carrying across the room. Malik nodded firmly beside her. Over the next few weeks, Zoe immersed herself in the complex world of non-profit management. Her dining room table disappeared under stacks of paperwork and grant applications. Emily proved invaluable, using her organizational skills to help structure the board of directors. At their first rally, Malik stood before a crowd of hundreds. His voice shook at first as he described the night of his arrest, but grew stronger as he continued. "They didn't see me as a person," he said. "They saw a threat, but I'm standing here today to show them, and all of you, exactly who I am." The crowd fell silent, hanging on his every word. In the back, Maya worked furiously at her sketchpad, capturing the energy of the moment in bold strokes. Her artistic talents found new purpose as she designed striking posters and social media graphics that captured the movement's spirit. The art exhibit Maya organized transformed the community center's walls into a gallery of pain and hope. Young artists shared their experiences through paintings, photographs, and installations. One piece, a mural of raised fists in rainbow colors, became the organization's unofficial symbol. When the first grant approval letter arrived, Zoe had to read it 3 times before the news sank in. The funding would allow them to hire staff, expand their outreach programs, and provide more direct support to families affected by police misconduct. The protest march drew thousands, stretching for blocks through downtown. Malik and Maya led the way, carrying a banner that read, "Justice starts here." News cameras captured the peaceful but powerful demonstration, broadcasting their message to millions. Later that evening, Zoe sat in her small office, surrounded by the physical reminders of their growing movement. Photos of community meetings covered one wall. Letters of support and thanks filled a corkboard beside her desk. As she sorted through the day's correspondence, her phone rang. The caller ID showed a major news network's number. Emily sat across from Noah in courtroom 302, her posture straight and unwavering. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the sterile room, making Noah's face appear even more haggard than usual. Her wedding ring had left a pale mark on her finger, but the weight of it was long gone. As the judge reviewed their divorce papers, Emily's mind drifted back to that final night. She could still see herself methodically packing boxes in their bedroom, the sound of Noah's desperate pleas echoing through the house. "Emily, please," he had begged, following her from room to room. "I can explain everything. I can change." His excuses had tumbled out one after another. Stress from work, pressure from colleagues, misunderstandings blown out of proportion. She had continued packing, her movements deliberate and calm. Family photos, kitchen utensils, the quilt her grandmother had made. Each item represented a piece of their shared life, now fractured beyond repair. "The kids need their father," Noah had tried, his voice breaking. That had made her pause just for a moment. "They need a father they can respect," she had replied, closing the final box. Back in the present, Emily found herself channeling that same quiet strength as she signed the divorce papers. Her hand didn't shake. She didn't look at Noah when he signed his name below hers. In the weeks that followed, Emily threw herself into her work with Zoe's organization. She spent her days visiting families affected by police misconduct, sitting in their living rooms, listening to their stories. Each home she entered reminded her why she had made the right choice. One mother, Maria Rodriguez, particularly touched her heart. Maria's teenage son had been wrongfully arrested and held for 3 days without proper cause. Emily helped her navigate the complex legal system, explaining terms in plain language, filling out paperwork late into the night. "You understand," Maria had said one evening, clutching Emily's hand. "You really understand." Together with Zoe, Emily established a support group for families like Maria's. They met weekly in the community center, sharing stories, resources, and hope. The circle grew larger each month, creating a network of healing and resilience. Marcus began attending these meetings, offering his perspective and support. At first, their interactions had been awkward, weighted with shared history and unspoken words. But as they worked side by side, organizing workshops and advocacy events, the tension began to ease. "You're doing good work here," Marcus told her one day after a particularly emotional session. His words carried the weight of forgiveness, of new beginnings. Emily found herself standing at the front of the community center, facing a room full of survivors and allies. The faces before her reflected strength, determination, and unity. She gripped the podium, her voice clear and steady as she addressed the crowd. "We are not defined by what happened to us," she declared. "We are defined by how we rise, how we support each other, and how we fight for change." The tension in the city council chambers was palpable as Marcus Black sat rigid in his front row seat, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. Beside him, Zoe maintained a steely gaze fixed on the council members. The room buzzed with nervous energy as protesters filled every available space, their signs held high with messages like, "Reform now" and "No more cover-ups." Council President Richardson cleared his throat, his voice echoing through the microphone. "We're here today to discuss Bill 2473, the Police Accountability and Reform Act." The mere mention of the bill's name sent whispers rippling through the crowd. The police union representatives sat in stark contrast to the protesters, their faces set in stern disapproval. Officer Thompson, the union president, adjusted his tie as he prepared to speak against the reforms. His arguments were familiar: claims about compromised officer safety and reduced effectiveness in fighting crime. Marcus watched as Councilwoman Martinez, known for her progressive stance, methodically dismantled each of Thompson's points. She referenced statistics, expert testimonies, and case studies from other cities where similar reforms had succeeded. Over the next few days, Zoe orchestrated a massive community response. Her phone barely stopped ringing as she coordinated with local organizations, arranged transportation for elderly residents to attend rallies, and managed social media campaigns. "We need everyone's voice," she told volunteers at a morning meeting. "Every signature, every phone call to council members counts." Marcus took a different approach, scheduling private meetings with council members who remained undecided. In Councilman Peterson's office, Marcus's voice trembled slightly as he shared the story of his wife Angela. "She always believed in this community," he said, watching Peterson's expression soften. "These reforms aren't just about policy. They're about protecting families like mine." The police union's counter-campaign flooded local media with advertisements warning of chaos and rising crime rates. But Zoe had anticipated this. She organized a peaceful march to City Hall, ensuring media coverage captured the true face of the movement. Families, teachers, business owners, all united in their demand for change. The march stretched for blocks with Zoe leading from the front. News helicopters circled overhead as national networks picked up the story. Signs bobbed up and down in the crowd. "Reform is overdue," and "Protect our community." The sight of thousands moving as one sent a clear message to the council: the community would not back down. Marcus's conversation with Councilman Peterson proved pivotal. As the swing vote on the council, Peterson's support could make or break the bill. "Your wife's story," Peterson told Marcus during their second meeting, "it made me think about my own family. Maybe it's time for change." The day of the final vote arrived with a mix of hope and anxiety. The chambers were even more crowded than before, with people standing along the walls and spilling out into the hallway. Marcus sat perfectly still, his heart pounding as each council member prepared to cast their vote. Zoe reached over and squeezed his hand, both of them holding their breath. Council President Richardson began the roll call. One by one, the votes came in. When Peterson's turn came, he paused for a moment, looked directly at Marcus, and said firmly, "Yes." The room erupted. Marcus stood in Angela's favorite park, his hands trembling slightly as he gripped the edge of the cloth covering the memorial plaque. The autumn breeze carried the sweet scent of maple leaves, just as it had on countless afternoons when he and Angela would walk here together. Zoe, Malik, and Maya flanked him supportively, while community members gathered in a respectful semicircle. Angela believed in the power of education, Marcus began, his voice steady despite the emotion welling in his chest. She knew that knowledge wasn't just about books and grades, it was about opening doors and creating change. With gentle hands, he unveiled the bronze plaque. The Angela Harper Scholarship Fund, honoring resilience. The polished surface caught the sunlight, making the engraved words shine. In the weeks that followed, Marcus threw himself into establishing the scholarship fund. His dining room table disappeared under stacks of grant applications and donor correspondence. Late into the night, he crafted proposals and reviewed applications, each one representing a young person's dreams. Zoe's connections proved invaluable. She arranged meetings with corporate sponsors and philanthropists, accompanying Marcus to each one. Her passionate advocacy helped secure substantial commitments, including a matching grant from a national foundation. The selection committee carefully reviewed dozens of applications, finally choosing 3 remarkable students for the inaugural scholarships. At the award ceremony, held in the community center, each recipient shared their story. The first, a young woman named Keisha, spoke about growing up in foster care and her determination to become a social worker. David, the second recipient, described his family's struggle with homelessness and his goal to study urban planning. The third, Teresa, moved many to tears with her account of overcoming domestic violence to pursue her dream of teaching. Maya's contribution brought Angela's spirit to vibrant life. Working with local artists and students, she created a stunning mural along the park's main walkway. The piece depicted Angela teaching, her familiar warm smile radiating from the wall. Around her, painted figures represented the community's journey. Scenes of protest, healing, and triumph flowed together in a powerful narrative of resilience. As Marcus stood before the completed mural, the sound of children playing nearby filled the air. Their laughter, pure and unrestrained, floated on the breeze. A small smile crossed his face as he traced the painted lines of Angela's face with his eyes. Here, in this moment, he could feel her dream of empowering future generations taking root and flourishing. The sun cast a warm glow over Harrison Park as families gathered for what had become more than just a community picnic. Red and yellow balloons bobbed gently in the breeze, their ribbons dancing above carefully arranged folding tables laden with homemade dishes. The aroma of Mrs. Johnson's famous potato salad mingled with the sweet scent of fresh-baked cornbread and barbecue. Malik and Maya Black worked in perfect sync, their movements fluid and practiced as they secured the corners of a white banner between 2 oak trees. Stronger together, a celebration of unity and hope, stretched across in bold letters, the words catching the sunlight. Maya adjusted the final corner, stepping back to ensure it hung straight. "Perfect," Malik said, giving his sister a quick side hug. "Just like we planned." Children darted between the tables, their laughter carrying across the park. Parents called out greetings to each other, many embracing like old friends, though they'd been strangers just months before. The gathering had drawn people from every corner of the community, teachers, shop owners, activists, and families who'd found strength in their shared experiences. As the afternoon progressed, small clusters formed naturally around the picnic tables. Mrs. Rodriguez shared her story of successfully advocating for bilingual emergency services, while Mr. Chen discussed the youth mentorship program he'd started at the community center. Their voices carried notes of pride and determination, each tale a testament to their resilience. Malik and Maya moved through the crowd with easy confidence, stopping to chat with everyone. They listened intently to each person's story, offering encouragement and support. Near the refreshment table, Zoe spoke with 2 reporters from the local news station, her passion evident as she described how the community had channeled their pain into positive action. "This isn't just about overcoming trauma," she explained, gesturing to the gathered families. "It's about creating lasting change through unity." Marcus led the group to a cleared area where a young oak sapling waited to be planted. The crowd gathered in a circle as he spoke about growth, renewal, and the importance of strong roots. His voice carried across the hushed gathering as he compared their community to the tree, growing stronger each day, providing shelter and support for future generations. After the tree planting, a solemn moment of silence fell over the group. They remembered those who hadn't made it through their darkest days, their absence a powerful reminder of why their continued advocacy mattered so much. The local band, comprised of high school students from the community center's music program, took their places under the banner. The lead singer, a young girl with bright eyes, announced they'd written a special song for the occasion. The melody started soft and grew stronger, lyrics speaking of hope, unity, and the power of standing together. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the park, Malik and Maya stepped forward with raised glasses of lemonade. Malik's voice wavered slightly as he addressed the crowd, thanking them for their unwavering strength and solidarity through the challenges they'd faced together. Maya took her brother's hand, her voice clear and strong as she delivered the final words. "We didn't just survive. We found each other, and that made us unstoppable." Glasses clinked together as children's laughter echoed across the park. The newly planted oak sapling stood tall in the fading light, its roots already beginning to take hold in the rich soil. The notification sounds on Zoe's phone hadn't stopped all morning. Her inbox was overflowing with messages from across the country, stories of courage, of standing up against injustice, of communities coming together. She sat at her desk in the Justice United office, scrolling through social media where their hashtag Stand for Change was trending nationwide. "Have you seen this?" she called out to her assistant, pointing to a viral video from Seattle. Another community started their own chapter using our blueprint. The walls of her office were covered with news clippings and photos. CNN had just run a feature on their work. The Washington Post had published an op-ed about their impact. Local newspapers from dozens of cities carried stories of grassroots movements inspired by their success. At precisely 2 p.m., Zoe settled into her chair for the virtual meeting. Her screen filled with faces, community leaders from Detroit, Atlanta, Los Angeles, and beyond. Some she recognized from previous collaborations, others were new allies in the fight for justice. "Welcome, everyone," she began, her voice steady and warm. "Today, we're here to share our strategies and learn from each other." One by one, leaders spoke about their victories and challenges. A woman from Chicago described how they'd successfully pushed for police reform. An activist from Houston shared their innovative approach to community outreach. As the meeting continued, Zoe's phone buzzed with a text from Maya. The documentary about their journey, Rising Together, had just dropped on Netflix. Early reviews were pouring in, praising its honest portrayal of their struggle and triumph. The next morning, Zoe launched Justice United's mentorship program. The first meeting brought together survivors of injustice with experienced advocates. The room hummed with energy as pairs connected, sharing stories and beginning their healing journey together. In schools across the city, teachers were incorporating Malik and Maya's story into their social justice curriculum. Students watched clips from the documentary, engaging in passionate discussions about systemic change and personal responsibility. The march filled the streets with thousands of supporters. Marcus took the stage first, his voice carrying across the crowd. "This is what unity looks like," he declared, gesturing to the diverse gathering. Zoe followed with a powerful call to action, and the crowd erupted in cheers. Social media exploded with the eager ripple effect, sharing images and videos of the historic gathering. That evening, Malik and Maya sat together in their apartment, watching a news interview on their laptop. A young activist appeared on screen, her eyes bright with determination. "I was lost before I heard their story," she said. "Malik and Maya showed me that change is possible, that our voices matter." Maya turned to her brother, a smile spreading across her face. "We've only just begun," she said softly. The warm spring breeze carried the sound of pomp and circumstance across the university lawn as Malik and Maya Black stood side by side, their graduation caps gleaming in the sunlight. Marcus watched from his seat in the front row, tears of pride welling in his eyes as he witnessed this milestone moment. Through the lens of memory, snapshots of their college journey flashed by. Maya organizing late-night study sessions while coordinating rallies for Justice United, Malik balancing basketball practice with internships at civil rights organizations. There were moments of exhaustion, when the weight of their dual roles as students and activists seemed overwhelming, but they had persevered. Marcus remembered finding Maya asleep at her desk, surrounded by sociology textbooks and protest signs. He recalled Malik's determined face as he practiced his speech for a congressional hearing on police reform, index cards scattered across their kitchen table. Through it all, their commitment never wavered. After the ceremony, the celebration moved to the familiar park where their journey had begun years ago. A crowd of hundreds gathered around a makeshift stage, their faces reflecting the diversity of the movement Malik and Maya had helped build. Children sat cross-legged on blankets while elderly community members settled into folding chairs, all eyes fixed on the twins. Maya spoke first, her voice strong and clear. "When we started this journey, we were scared teenagers facing an uncertain future. But you, all of you, became our extended family. You taught us that pain can be transformed into purpose." Malik stepped forward, placing a steady hand on his sister's shoulder. "Every setback made us stronger. Every victory belonged not just to us, but to everyone who dared to dream of a better world." Marcus approached the podium holding a crystal award that caught the afternoon light. His voice trembled slightly as he presented it to his children, commemorating their years of dedication to community service and social justice. Zoe took the stage next, her presence commanding as ever. "What started in this very park has grown beyond our wildest dreams," she announced. "Justice United is opening its first international office next month. Malik and Maya showed us that age is no barrier to creating change." A small girl, no more than 6 years old, pushed through the crowd clutching a piece of paper. She approached Maya shyly, holding up her crayon drawing. It showed 2 figures standing tall, surrounded by hearts and stars, a child's vision of hope made real through Malik and Maya's work. Maya knelt down to accept the drawing, her eyes glistening. Rising, she joined hands with Malik at the center of the stage. The siblings faced their community, the people who had supported them, challenged them, and grown with them through years of struggle and triumph. The crowd rose to their feet as Maya spoke the words that captured their shared journey. "Together, we can make the world a better place." Her voice rang out clear and true, met by thunderous applause that echoed across the park. From above, the scene told a story of transformation, the vibrant gathering of people from all walks of life, the children playing near the commemorative tree they'd planted years ago, the banners of Justice United fluttering in the breeze. It was a living testament to what could be achieved when a community united behind a common cause. If you enjoyed the story of Marcus, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it